So now, the chairman of the National Agency for Skill Development in India will take the floor. Juan Carlos Tejeda will be introducing him. He's a member of the Foundation's Board of Trustees.
Bueno, buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Members of the Tripartite Foundation's Board of Trustees, guests, and dear friends. I'll be co-chairing this session together with Mrs. Gabriela Olarte, who is also a member of the board, and she's the Director for International Relations at CEPIME, the Employers Association for SMEs. She will be chairing during the Q&A.
Mr. Ramadorai, welcome to Spain. Welcome to Fundación Tripartita. Namaste. Mr. Ramadorai has an incredible CV. Actually, he's a chairman of the National Skill Development Agency, NSDA. He was born in Nagpur, in Maharashtra, India. Regarding with his education, he holds a bachelor's degree in physics from Delhi University, a Bachelor of Engineering degree in Electronic and Telecommunications, and a Master of Science degree in Computer Science from the University of California, Los Angeles. Mr. Ramadorai also attended the Senior Executive Development Program at the MIT Sloan School of Management. He is currently advisor to the Prime Minister of India at the National Council on Skill Development Agency. He is the equivalent to an Indian cabinet minister. He is linked to some 20 companies and consortiums, being part of their advisory committees, both in the India and the USA. For example, Tata, Deutsche Bank, Innova TV, Aviation Software Development Consultancy India, IT advisor to the cities of Qingdao and Hangzhou in China, among others. He is linked to Tata Consultancy Services of Spain. Mr. Ramadorai, you have 1 hour. After that, I'm sure it will be questioned about your interest in the speech. It's your turn. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and hello.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. I'm honored to be invited at the Spanish-Asian meeting to discuss about the on-the-job training models across Asian countries. I would like to thank Casa Asia and the Fundación Tripartita para la Formación en el Empleo for organizing this meeting. While the conference is specifically about on-the-job training, I would like to take a moment to share with you some perspectives about India and its overall journey in skill development. As you'll be knowing, India has the second largest population in the world of about 1.25 billion. And we are the youngest country in terms of average age of our citizens. In the past decade, as India moved in its journey of liberalization and globalization, it was encountering a problem of having a high youth unemployment rate. On the other hand, industries have been complaining about not getting the right skilled youth for employment. While we have a lot of training providers, such as government-sponsored industrial training institutes, vocational training centers, private sector training centers, and the NGO-trained skilling centers, there was still a gap, so India decided to adopt a multi-pronged approach to address this issue. From a governance perspective, to provide the right focus on skill development, in the last few years, we set up a National Skill Development Agency at the central level with a mandate to coordinate and harmonize the skill development activities in the country. In the last year, We set up a full-fledged Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship at the central government level, reporting to our Prime Minister. While we still have a federated structure in terms of each state having its own skill development mission, the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship has become the focal point to govern and direct and support all the federated organizations. We believe that the private sector has a massive role to play in skill development and employment, and hence the government created an organization called the National Skill Development Corporation in 2008 in a public-private partnership mode. NSDC is a very professionally run organization that aims to promote skill development by catalyzing the setting up of a large number of high-quality training institutions across the country. It provides funding to build scalable for-profit vocational training institutions. It's also responsible for enabling support systems and train the trainer academics either directly or through partnerships. Since 2010, in the last 4 years of operation or 5 years of operation, NSDC has funded 206 partners who in turn have set up 3,325 training centers across the country and to date have trained more than 5 million people. Among the first problems we noticed in our vocational education was the mismatch between vocational curriculum and industry requirement, the gap. We wanted more industry participation in defining the skills and knowledge that should form the vocational training curriculum. With this in mind, we set up various sector skill councils, SSCs as they are called, one per sector like construction, textiles, information technology, manufacturing, retail, etc., with representation from industry, representation from members of industry associations, business leaders, training providers, and government bodies, to essentially participation of all ecosystem members. The onus of creating curriculum, defining standards, and building a consensus on employing skilled manpower in each sector was essentially shifted to the sector skill councils. We decided to revamp our national qualifications and classification of occupations, and each of these sector skill councils was mandated to define detailed occupation map for each sector. Aligned to the occupation map, the sector skill councils defined qualifications packs for a job, for each job role, and the national occupation standards for each sub-function within a job role. Thus, for any training, we now have a specific qualification pack and a set of national occupation standards to which the training course needs to be aligned to. This essentially has brought about standardization and normalization among various training institutions across the country. As on date, the SSCs have defined 1,339 qualification packs and 6,673 NOSes across 28 sectors. These QPs and NOSes are vetted by the National Skills Qualification Committee and are published as a national standard in what we call as a skills registry. Once published, all accredited training providers are mandated to be compliant to the QPs and the NOSes. So that's the standardization part of it. One of the root causes of the high youth unemployment is due to the high rate of dropouts in secondary schools and colleges. The government has launched a scheme which provides assistance to the state and schools towards implementation of the vocational education in schools. Vocationalization of the secondary education provides for diversification of educational opportunities so as to enhance individual employability and provides an alternate for those pursuing higher education. Now I'll touch upon the National Skills Qualification Framework. To address the aspirational aspects of vocational education and bring it in par with academic education, we defined a National Skills Qualification Framework. It's essentially a competency-based framework that organizes all the qualifications according to a series of levels of knowledge, skills, and aptitude. These levels, graded from 1 to 10, are defined in terms of learning outcomes, which the learner must possess regardless of whether they are obtained through formal, non-formal, or informal learning. The skills qualification framework facilitates the awarding of credits and supports credit transfer and progression routes between the academic education and the vocational training. So the NSQF thus provides a path to a carpenter to get a baccalaureate if he or she so desires. In India, where traditionally skills have been passed down from father to son, NSQF formalizes the recognition of such prior learning. In India, vocational training was primarily done in industrial training institutes run by the government. To improve the quality of this training and bring it to close industry needs, private sector companies were made a part of the management committee of these industrial training institutes. Such ITIs are then transformed into focus centers of excellence in specific sectors and trades where training is augmented by work-aligned practical experience, hands-on experience. These ITIs have also been moved under the jurisdiction of the newly formed Ministry of Skill Development. It's no longer in the Ministry of Labour Employment, it's part of the Ministry of Skills Development and Entrepreneurship to ensure better consolidation and monitoring. There is also a plan to set up a new set of ITIs which are rebranded as multi-skilling institutes in the public-private partnership mode with very strong industry linkages. The MSIs will focus on long-term skilling and will be located near the industrial clusters as skill hubs fostering apprenticeships and placements. A true measure of success of any skill development effort is employment. Hence, it is critical that skilling is linked to the requirements of the market, namely the supply and the demand matching. The Ministry of Skill Development through the National Skill Development Agency is working on creating a technology-driven labor market information system. The LMIS will link all the players in the skilling and employment ecosystem, including employers, training providers, candidates, to ensure that skilling results in employment. Today, driven by a broad perception, many students tend to take up skilling in a particular area, whether it's retail, IT, or telecom. This creates an oversupply of people and a saturation of jobs in those sectors. The LMIS will provide granular data on the availability of jobs and the supply of workers, thus avoiding the situation of concentration on one or two specific sectors. Specifically on government-regulated on-the-job training in India, it is termed as apprenticeship and is recognized by the Indian government with an Apprenticeship Act. Let me share with you a little bit of history on the Apprenticeship Act and its current form today. As we all know, an apprentice works temporarily with a company receiving on-the-job training. On completion of the same, either the company absorbs the apprentices as a full-time employee or releases the job-ready apprentice for others to take on. Apprenticeship is one of the best means to acquire job-specific skills. Learning by doing has been proven to be a pedagogically sound approach. In India, Apprentices Act was conceptualized in 1961 when the Indian industry was largely manufacturing-based with insignificant service sector. I'm talking about 1961. It was enacted for regulating the program of training of employees working as apprentices in the company. The Apprenticeship Act had a strict inspection-based mechanism to ensure compliance. In the initial couple of decades after our independence, our industry lacked adequate maturity and hence a prescriptive regime for notification of apprenticeship quota and strict controls were perhaps considered necessary. However, as time passed, this inspector-based regime actually became a burden and a hindrance for companies to hire apprentices. Compliance to the Act rather than the spirit of developing and skilling apprentices for the benefit of the industry soon became the norm. Adding to that, India moved on towards increasing its services sector, and there was unfortunately no apprenticeship recognized by the government in that sector, in the services sector. The Apprenticeship Act has been in operation now for almost 5 decades, but it has been seen that there is very little improvement in terms of utilization of apprentices. In fact, India, with a labor force of more than 480 million, has a capacity of only 490,000 apprentices in various industries, out of which only 280,000 apprenticeship positions were filled last year. This is minuscule when compared to Germany with 3 million apprentices and China with 20 million apprentices. This certainly was a problem, and our government has begun to notice that Indian industry has also been expressing a desire that the apprenticeship regime should be made business-friendly with reduced government controls. A self-regulated regime will lead to a sharp increase in the number of apprentices voluntarily trained by the industry. After consultation with the Indian industry, my office championed these reforms and came up with the recommendations which were incorporated as amendments to the Apprenticeship Act. I am pleased to say that the amendments to the Act was passed by our Parliament and became official on the 5th of December 2014. It is expected that these new amendments will help to leapfrog the total apprenticeship seats to 2.3 million, an increase of almost 5 times the current number. I would like to share a few important amendments which I made the Act to enable apprenticeship training. With the earlier Act prescribed fine-grained details on the number of apprentices per trade, companies have now been given the full flexibility in terms of deciding how many apprentices they want to take for which trade while maintaining a minimum limit of at least 2.5% of their workforce. The service sector, which was previously excluded from the Act, has now been brought under the purview similar to the manufacturing sector. To prevent apprentices from being used as a cheap labor, an upper limit of 10% of workforce was introduced. The minimum stipends for apprentices were linked to minimum wages for the trades at the state level. That is 70 to 90% of minimum wage from year 1 to 3. Companies have the flexibility to decide which trades they want to include under apprenticeship. The minimum duration of apprenticeship was brought down to 6 months to provide for short-term courses. Currently, there is a lack of ease and transparency faced by institutes and students in the process of filing applications for apprenticeship training. In addition, the companies find the returns to be submitted to the government quite tedious and cumbersome. It was felt that there is a need to develop and commission a web-based portal where all companies would be required to publish their trade-wise requirement of apprentices. Apprentices would be encouraged to apply online. This would facilitate online interaction between apprentices and the companies. Companies would also publish the details of apprentices deployed on this portal, and government authorities would be able to get any apprentices' data directly from the portal. This portal is currently at an advanced stage of development. It was also decided that apprentices do not get any special HR privileges. Regular HR policies as applicable to normal workers, including holidays, leave, shifts, and working hours, should be applicable to apprentices also. The gist of these reforms is about giving more flexibility to the company to decide how many apprentices in which trades, what duration, what stipend, what terms and conditions, while prescribing a broad guideline to prevent frauds and exploitation. Government and industry associations are working together to propagate these reforms to the industry so that the country experiences a qualitative and quantitative improvement in the numbers. The Amendment Act could be a game changer and exponentially increase the number of apprentices in this country and develop youth who are confident and participate in economic activity through employment and entrepreneurship. I talked about the private sector participation. To supplement the government-regulated apprenticeship program, there is another public-private partnership initiative called National Employability Through Apprenticeship, launched by a private organization. Team leads in partnership with industry associations, the Confederation of Indian Industry, and the National Skill Development Corporation. This initiative has been launched under the auspices of the National Employability Enhancement Mission. Under NETAP, Team Leads enrolls candidates into Skills University and works with corporates to employ trainees as apprentices. There is a combination of learning by doing and learning while earning, and this training earns the students credit points towards certification, degrees, diplomas offered by the Team Lead Skills University. There are other similar examples of successful employment-linked skilling, such as the Pan IIT Alumni Reach for India, the Indian Institute of Indian Institute of Technologies, Tata Strive within the Tata Group through the CSR and through the Trust, which are private sector or social sector initiatives that work with private employers and identify existing job opportunity for which candidates are mobilized and trained. Essentially coming from the demand side and then putting together the supply through world-class training and certification. In a unique public-private partnership between Tata Motors and an industrial training institute in the northeastern part of the country, they have upgraded the mechanical motor vehicle trade by supply of tools and equipment like engine cut sections, gearboxes and axles to make the training industry relevant. With a view of providing practical training, The Industrial Training Institute and the Tata Motors have come up with a very unique business education symbiotic model by setting up a Tata Motors authorized service station within the training institute premises itself. The service center was set up in collaboration with a local dealer of Tata Motors. The service station generates the revenue which can be further plowed into the ITI's future development. It's a revenue earning and a revenue that is deployed back into the institution. More importantly, it also provides real-time job experience to the trainees who get to work on actual customer cars under supervision of a Tata Motors technician and thus learn on the job. While other apprenticeship models bring the students to the job, this brought the job to the students in their own campus. In countries like Germany and Switzerland, over 60% of young people enter the job market through apprenticeship. The system enables lateral and upward mobility, and I have met several of their CEOs who began as apprentices. The most impressive part of this dual education system is the role that industry plays in it, with almost 70% of the training happening in the industry. We as a country are very open to learning from the best practices around the world, and the government is now partnering with Switzerland and Germany to understand the dual education system and implement as pilots on the same in India. The Swiss Vocational Education and Training Initiative launched a pilot project in 2008 based on the Swiss VETS dual track model. This involved many stakeholders, the Swiss Indian Chamber of Commerce in partnership with the Swiss Federal Office for Professional Education and Technology, the Swiss Mechanical and Electrical Engineering Industries Association, and the Swiss Federal Institute for Vocational Education and Training, participating private companies, the Swiss companies which are based in India. A 2-year training program, multi-skill production technicians, was started, with the private companies playing a key role in designing the course structure and also providing on-the-job training for the trainees. There was 100% employment. So far I have spoken about a government or a PPP initiative for on-the-job training. Let me now talk about a pure private sector initiative in this area. I'll give an example of the Indian IT industry, of which I've been a part for the last 4 decades. As the IT industry in India started to scale based on the rising demands of outsourcing from overseas customers, we realized that there is a shortage of supply of good talent to meet these demands. Typically, the IT companies would recruit engineering graduates from the fields of electronics or computer science, or postgraduates in computer applications. But when this supply became a limiting factor, the industry expanded its coverage to recruit students from other engineering streams, such as electrical, mechanical, civil, or any other discipline. To address the gap in the skills required for a software job versus the knowledge acquired from the academic course, we developed an in-house training program which was called the Initial Learning Program. Every student who got recruited would mandatorily have to go through a minimum of 3 months of initial learning. This learning was designed purely for a job skills perspective and had a mix of theory-based learning and practical-based doing. Students were taught the essentials of software development process and practices, importance of quality in software, and they developed a small software system in a simulation of a real-life project. This learning also covered some soft skills, such as communication, etiquette, grooming, etc., which are essential life skills. As this model matured, the IT companies started working with academic institutions and incorporated certain job-relevant skills into the academic curriculum directly, so as to ensure that the students are more job-ready when they pass out of college. I strongly believe that the willingness of the IT industry to invest in the development of talent was one of the key reasons for the success of this industry. Because this industry today employs directly 3.2 million people and 10 million indirect jobs, and the total turnover of the industry is about $160 billion, and it is expanding at about 12 to 15% year on year. In conclusion, by this example, I wanted to convey the youth and students are bursting with tremendous potential, and it's the responsibility of the industry and the government to come forward and mold these students according to their needs. I firmly believe that industry should not consider this as a regulatory or a mandatory requirement. Rather, this is an opportunity for the industry to leverage the youth for its own growth and success. Industry-led apprenticeships ensure learning by doing and seamless transition into a job and can achieve scale. When people have the skills the industry needs, the market forces will ensure absolutely employment. The government's role in this should be that of an enabler and facilitator instead of an enforcer or a policing authority. In India, it was not just the Apprenticeship Act which needed an overhaul, but also the Labor Laws, Industrial Disputes Act, which made it difficult for businesses to hire apprentices and full-time employees. The industry resorted to alternate mechanisms such as contract labor that come at far lower wages than those for permanent employees and are better attuned to business cycles. The new government is now proposing labor reforms in various areas, and it's also propagating a more federal approach for states to enact their proposed changes as applicable. Rajasthan, as a case in point, has already done. Andhra Pradesh is talking about it. Madhya Pradesh is talking about it, and quite a few other states. India today is adopting a consultative approach with open dialogues between the central government, the state governments, private players, and the social sector. Ideas coming out of such deliberations are evaluated and converted into outcome-driven actions. Outcomes focus is another key element. A collaborative knowledge system is being envisioned to structure and capture these discussions among the various stakeholders. One of the ideas resulting from this approach was the setting up of national skills universities, which will provide nationally recognized degrees and certification for vocational programs. This is being driven by the Ministry of Skill Development and will help enhance the appeal of vocational training and jobs in the country. We are seeing an increasing adoption of digitization and technology in the imparting of skills. E-learning, distance learning, which are commonplace in academic learning, are now being leveraged for vocational education. Vocational training, which involves a lot more activity-based learning, is ripe for multimedia content like videos, simulators, incorporating gamification technology, make vocational learning fun as well as aspirational. We have seen numerous success cases of simulators for areas like welding, driving, textiles, and others. Such technologies require investment in IT infrastructure, good network bandwidth, and India is currently working on taking the internet into every home in every village of the country. Smartphones have democratized the availability of technology and are a great medium to reach out to each citizen. Technology platforms like MOOCs, which have redefined traditional education, will surely disrupt vocational education in the future. India is poised at the cusp of a great opportunity, and skills forms a key lever for us to optimize our potential. But we also need to scale up our skills, and we need to scale up with speed because our window of opportunity is small. 12 million youth enter the work stream every year. With the active participation of all the stakeholders, leveraging our strengths in technology, and learning from the best practices of our partner countries, we are confident of success. Before I conclude, I once again want to thank the organizers for inviting me to this conference. Spain is acknowledged as a global leader in solar power, especially the concentrated solar power. We are already working very closely with Japan in the area of railway infrastructure. I look forward to mutually beneficial partnerships and take back learnings from these countries present here and leverage them in the context of India's challenges. Muchas gracias por su atención. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramadorai. Thanks a lot. I understand you are very well focused on youngsters. The youth in India, I think, is such a potential, as you, as well as your ambassador, has already told us, for the future of your country. Let me please, before giving the audience the floor, let me first seize the minute of glory I have here on this table to ask first a question for you. I would like to know, I was wondering, how could India become, in such a short period of time, a reference on technological services as well as programs at an international level?
No, I think we started the IT industry way back in 1968, with Tata's being one of the earliest to start this game in 1968. I think the role of the government, or the government at that time, was very little, because there was no domestic market for IT services at all. So we, as a corporation, and some of us who had come back from the US just to initiate like a startup mindset, looked at the market outside the country. That's why it developed as a services industry rather than as a manufacturing industry, because the market was outside. I think from there on, some of the problems in terms of import of hardware, import of computers was a big challenge. But then we overcame that by agreeing to all the demands of the government in terms of customs duties, the tariffs, the export commitments, etc., which means it's essentially a never say, must-do attitude in everything which we did, because we had to survive by looking at a market outside and survive by showing with the intellectual power which we had created and attracting a bunch of people from the universities. I think the year 2000 gave us a big opportunity to scale up from a year 2000 problem which shaped up at that time, the Y2K as it is famously called. And the internet explosion also gave us a big opportunity to relate to the market very, very quickly. What did we have as a raw material was excellent youth with excellent capabilities to learn and relearn. And we utilized that very, very effectively by putting our heart and mind into training, skilling, retraining, reskilling, and applying it on a continuous basis. And then scaling up at every stage by incorporating IT systems within our own functioning so that the entire back office was automated from day one. I think it's a combination of opportunities, and relating to those opportunities, essentially shape up the supply or proactively shape up the supply to meet the demand. And that's what we learned, and that's what scaled us up. And that's what we are trying to apply in the vocational engineering, vocational training space.
Thank you. Interesting. ¿Alguna pregunta?
Are there any more questions for Mr. Subramanian? Well, I think you... no questions? Let's see. Yes. Yes. I would like to ask you, the other day I read a report which said that most of the NASA workers in the US are Indian. And I would like to know whether in India you get those people to come back to India, or their knowledge to come back to, not the workers, but at least the knowledge. Do you get that knowledge to come back to India? Because these are very well-trained people, but they go to other countries.
Well, I think traditionally the export of talent from India, both for higher education as well as employment, has been a regular occurrence. But the biggest advantage we have is the huge population, the 1.25 billion, where for every one person goes, there are at least 10 other people that are available within the country. The interaction between the Indian professionals that are living there, as well as opportunities for them to contribute to the improvement or betterment of our country, has become a very, very articulated process now, where the non-resident Indians can spend anywhere from whatever time that they can afford to give to the sabbaticals, through exchange programs, through the government-to-government interactions, private partnerships. I think it has become very, very vibrant. Yes, quite a few of them are coming back. Now, more importantly, people going out as also, in terms of startups within the country, the startup ecosystem has started getting built up. If you take a Bangalore, if you take a Delhi, if you take Mumbai, if you take Pune, if you take Calcutta, there are enough clusters which are the technology clusters where funding for startups is becoming a way of life. Next to the educational institutions also, we are setting up these institutes or clusters or technology villages. I think the whole idea is to keep the ecosystem. We cannot mandate anything other than for people to see what they want to make as choices, and that's the best we can do by creating the right environment. And we are seeing that work for everybody's benefit.
I wanted to ask you if companies have a obligation to pay for, do they have to pay anything for training, or do they have to train a number of people per year or whatever? And then also on the other hand, do workers have a right to training, some hours a year or whatever?
I think, like I said, that the minimum wages that are to be paid to the apprentices are at least 70 to 80% of the regular wages. That's one thing which we are trying to say as part of the Apprenticeship Act and the amendments that have been done. I think right to learn is something, right to skill, we are trying to push through the ministry to see if we can get that right to skill. And industry is absolutely for, because some of the corporate social responsibility funds, the CSR funds, 2% of the profits of the company must be plowed, of which education and skills is one of the components which is permitted. So I think the whole thing is a cooperative ecosystem than a control ecosystem, and that's what is fueling a large scale up and supply and demand match. That's the best way I can see right now.
Hola, buenos días, muchas gracias por su presentación.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. It's interesting what you've said about a system, national qualification system, certified system in India, the obligation that all the training courses be in line with that national system. I would like you to give us more details about this and tell us whether within that national qualification system that includes training, initial basic professional or vocational training from the standard education and the training that is given by companies, and to tell us whether the state subsidizes training with public money in companies that doesn't come under the national qualification system.
I think the National Skills Qualification Framework is a competency-based framework that has been completely mapped out from level 1 through 10 across various sectors, and to date about 28 sectors. The introduction of the vocational education across the school system, starting from the standard 9, namely the secondary education, has already started in a number of states. We are in the process of scaling up across multiple states. Both the center and the state governments have been supported through funds to start at the school level. These are all the publicly run schools. I think integration through the credit system from the vocational education and the general education and pathways to those through the bridge courses is also being defined as I speak. And having not done this for the last 60 plus years, mapping that and detailing that through the sector skill councils has been a very rigorous activity. But having done that, the commonality of purpose and making sure that the NOSIS and the QPs, or the occupation standards and the qualification packs, a system of evaluation of that through the National Skills Qualification Committee under the NSDA is what is being done. To date, we have already populated the register with about 150 competency mappings. The whole question is, and whole intent is to complete almost 1,000 by the financial year ending this year. That is March of 2016. I think the funding has been through multiple sources, including the government's funds. Also, for the recognition of prior learning, also we have done some funding this year through what we call as Pradhan Mantri Kaushalya Vikas Yojana, or the Prime Minister's skilling effort for certification and recognition. So that's going to skill almost certify 2.4 million youth in this financial year itself, so that people who cannot afford, they'll get money to get trained and certified, and we'll be providing that through a very rigorous process and a certification mechanism. So I think the whole interventions are towards outcomes. The interventions are towards capturing those outcomes in a database and enabling a pathway for the youth to go up the ladder rather than freeze at a certain point. That's the way we are looking at this whole thing. Industry is very much supportive of it because they have been a part of the sector skill councils and definition of some of these competency mapping.
Hola, buenos días. Muchas gracias.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the enormous wealth of information that you've provided us with. But there's something that I understand that within the work, employment, most employment is in what we call irregular economy. Now, we recognize the enormous efforts that are being made to improve training, especially of young people. The question is, can or is there any attempt being made to improve the level of qualifications of all these people who are working in the irregular economy?
I think the point you made is very valid. Today, if you look at the composition and the distribution of manpower, 93% of the workforce in India is from the informal sector. So the challenge for all of us is how do you move the informal sector to the formal sector? And that's where I said through the recognition of prior learning and certification is one starting point. If a carpenter's son has not gone to a school and then he is recognized at a level of competency as a carpenter, we have a mechanism for doing that, or we are defining a mechanism for doing that. Then we are enabling them through certain courses and certain soft skills to make sure that they have the formal system in place which will support this youth or a set of youth in a certain sector or a certain trade. So I think the whole idea is to move from the informal sector to the formal sector over a period of time. But I think traditionally it has been in the informal sector, and all the enablers, what I talked about, the Apprenticeship Act, the Labor Act, the labor reforms, minimum wages, the role of industry, role of the government as a facilitator, all of them are coming into place together. Yes, the idea is to move from the informal sector to the formal sector, and more importantly also from the agricultural sector to the manufacturing sector and or the services sector. And I also gave an example of the IT sector where entire 3.2 million people and the growing is completely a formal sector that has been driven by the industry itself.
Very specific question, sir. Based on what you've just told us, public money will continue to play an important role going forward as you scale up to hit your targets or exceed them. Are you utilizing that same portal and other technology-based platforms to monitor the expense of spending public money on this project, especially going forward when it achieves critical mass? That is something we would be interested to know about here in Spain. How is it transparent, especially the public part of the expenditure? Thanks.
That's an excellent question. Based on our experience of using the public money, the National Skill Development Corporation, the public-private initiative I talked about, and funding every single of the training providers, 260 to be exact, who are scaling up, we are subjecting them to an internal audit through the ministry or an independent audit who looks at this whole, disposition of the funds itself. Funds management through what we call as an ILFS trust, the Infrastructure Leasing and Finance Trust, Services Trust, is completely doing an independent audit of every single outcome where the money was spent and what was the outcome, what improvements need to be done. In addition, the functioning of the National Skill Development Corporation has been done by the CAG, namely the Controller and Auditor General of India, and that will also be a public report. What we want to do ultimately is to do a concurrent and a real-time audit rather than a post-audit after the money has been spent, and disseminate it publicly and transparently through our portal. That's the journey we are undertaking.
Sí, a mí me gustaría saber.
I'd like to know, it's a luxury to have you here. I'd like to ask you, is there going to, in Europe over the next few years, we will probably need qualified labor, and it would be very good to be able to convalidate training in India and training in Europe. How are you going to address that problem of making Indian training valid in other countries of the world?
When I talked about the Swiss VET or the German model of dual vocational education and training, and one of the critical components of that is certification both by the SSC-based certification or the National Vocational Training certification in addition to the German certification or the Swiss certification. So dual certification is one of the things which we are making sure that is incorporated in collaboration with the member countries outside. So essentially, a level of competency in India would be the same as the level of competency in the European Union, as an example. And we are partnering with the European Union in a big way to address this specific issue. So every single mapping of a skill in the country through the competency levels is being mapped to the European Union competencies, and we are making sure that the equivalence is established And the training providers and the certification mechanism, whether it's the TUV from Germany or any of those, will recognize the skilled and certified training, whether it is done in India or in Germany. That's the whole idea. The facilitation has been done by sending the trainers for training to start with, and then making sure that the accreditation and certification agency are accepted mutually between both the countries. Similarly, we have done an experiment with Singaporeans in Delhi, in the National Capital Region, where a dual certification mechanism has also been introduced. So we are partnering with various countries to address this specification.
Sí, buenos días, muchas gracias por...
Good morning, thank you very much for your presentation. I recognize that India, 1.5 billion inhabitants, is really a complex country. You've said that 93% of new employment is in the informal economy. That's a huge challenge. I'd like to ask you, when you've said that companies are obliged to hire 2.5% of their personnel in the form of apprentices, is that done in all companies, whatever their size? That is the first question. And the second question is, do you consider that training, and especially apprenticeships, certified apprenticeships, are a way to combat this problem with the irregular labor market in your country?
No, I think the point you made about the complexity is very valid. We cannot underestimate the complexity because of the scale and size of the population itself. I think we are essentially trying to seed at least 1,000 ideas, of which even if a couple of them take up and scale up, and connecting some of those ideas together, that's the approach we have undertaken very clearly. Innovation is going to become a very, very critical part, and then introducing vocational education as an aspirational one at a very young level is a very fundamental requirement. Because of the federal structure, the state governments and the state skill missions have to play a very active role, because most of the action and the implementation happens at the state level. I think states are also asked to talk directly to the training providers or certification providers or the NSDC through that mechanism, so that let 1,000 flowers bloom and then let us see what happens at the end of the day, so long as there is a standardized mechanism. I think certified apprenticeship are absolutely a must, because recognition of that, the moment industry has participated in the sector skill councils, they will hire the 2.5% at the end of the day. To address the small and medium enterprises where most of the violations take place, we are initiating a separate dialogue with the small and medium enterprises, and also representation of them in the sector skill councils itself, and tracking them very specifically as also one of the objectives we have put in place. I think SME segment is the biggest challenge for every country, and SMEs are the engine of employment at the end of the day. We have almost 60 million MSMEs in the country, and we need to upgrade them to a level where professional skilling and professional certification is accepted. That's going to be a huge challenge, but you got to make the beginning. One of the ways you can connect is if there is a OEM and he connects with this whole supplier chain, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supplier, then automatically the skills upgradation and end-to-end quality becomes a way of life. Those are some techniques we are bringing in, so that mandatorily the larger companies will ask the suppliers to commit to these standards and supply. Construction industry, we are again looking at that in a big way. Retail industry, we are looking at it in a big way. Healthcare sector, we are looking at it in a big way. Those are some things which are addressing. Here we will not be shy of learning from anybody to make things happen.
Hola, buenos días.
Good morning. I want to thank you for your presentation, very interesting. I'd like to know what the role of trade unions is in and employers' organizations in your country in the makeup and development of your vocational training programs, and also within companies, if that is the case. Thank you very much.
I think training is an essential component of the well-being of a youth. and making sure that the demand is understood by everybody instead of just supplying without any outcomes or any need is the way. The state governments, through the dialogue with the various unions or the trade unions, are initiated that process to say that where there is an opportunity, we can make sure that opportunity is available to every single part and every single youth in the country. The challenges of addressing the last mile has been a tremendous issue, and I think NGOs or the social sector or the social agents play a very critical component as part of that. It's a continuous dialoguing process where the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship sits with the representatives of the trade unions, the state governments, the state skill missions, and the various ministries of the center, so that it's a collaborative effort to address and then make sure that the end-to-end optimization takes place on a continuous basis. The journey has begun, like I said, 4 or 5 years ago when the previous government started this whole skill development and vocational education, starting with advocacy because it was not an aspirational skill. Degree was better preferred than a vocational diploma or a vocational certificate. I think to move from that to a formalized system, moving the informal to the formal sector, we are attempting over the next 10 to 15 years so that the population gets that and access to the right skill at the right point for the right job, and through information asymmetry and the labor market information system is what we are trying to do. And the unions, the trade unions, are a part of this journey, and everybody is aligned to this more or less. The Apprenticeship Act, for example, it went through an enormous amount of dialogue with the unions, and they agreed to this so that all the stakeholders are involved, so it's not a situation that somebody doesn't buy into it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramadorai. I'm sure that if anybody else would like to ask any question to you, he or she could do it during our break time. Sorry? There's still one question.
Okay.
Hello. Thank you, Ramadorai, for being with us and sharing this fantastic moment. And my question is, what is the role that the trade union and employer organizations has in the Indian system, if they have?
No, I think we have in the private sector, in the organizations, there is a trade union that is represented. In some cases, more than one trade union is represented, depending upon the part of the country they are in. I think it's a negotiation process with the company, and the negotiations in terms of agreement last for at least 3 to 5 years, depending upon the company itself. I think the industry bodies also help because there is a commonality of purpose between the various companies in that sector itself. I think invariably it's a 3 to 5 year agreement that stands the test of time. I think any improvements to that happens every 3 years. But then the role of the government also is to make sure that there is a fairness and then transparency in this whole negotiations. I think Tata's is one of the classic examples of trade union being a part of the process. And I think there is even a talk of whether in certain industries, certain organizations where trade union should be represented in the board itself. I think that's still premature, but at least talks are happening in that space as well. But essentially it's a dialoguing process and an acceptable dialogue. Today, people are looking for employment, entrepreneurship and opportunities rather than a dole out where somebody is giving you something. Everybody wants, the youth are so excited with the communication, with the reach and ability to know, and the mobile has played a very, very critical component in our communication and what is happening across. The tweets, the internet access, the Facebook pages, if you see from the rural India, it's an amazing story of transformation. And if some of us who have traveled after we took this government position, you can see the vibrancy and the excitement of the youth, not as dole out, but wanting to do something and wanting to connect with the world, not just India alone.
Sí, muchas gracias por su intervención.
Thank you very much. You've spoken about the importance and the effort that's being made to certify the centers that give training. put them close to the, bring them close to the industrial areas and the workers. My question is whether there's any kind of assessment or evaluation that is done of the training that is given to workers, and beyond that, the transfer of that knowledge into the workplace. Thank you very much.
I think the assessment of training providers and the assessment of the outcome is going to be one of the critical activities. We want to track every single youth for completion of the training and making sure they are employed and continue on the employment for a certain number of years. The unique identification of every individual through what we call as the Aadhaar number, or the unique ID number, which was championed by the previous government, is being continued. And as part of the financial inclusion, every single youth has a bank account number. So they all opened the accounts. So tracing a youth from the point of entry into the skilling through completion of the training and through the completion of the employment and continuing on the employment and the right wages going into his bank account through the financial inclusion is what we will connect at the end of the day. I think the mechanics of a building infrastructure is very much becoming available. Once that infrastructure is available, the digitization becomes fairly straightforward because you can track every single youth in the country. That's our whole hope. We did some pilots in the construction industry as an example, where we gave account on the spot where the construction activity was happening, and then traced those people who migrated from one part of the country to another part of the country. These are laborers, labor workers, and then seeing that whether the upward mobility is there. So we'll do certain research studies with certain universities, both from India and abroad, to track some of these things and publish as we go along. I think these are data gathering has been one of the biggest challenges in the past. We are addressing through, again, technology interventions through the mobile or through smart devices to capture the data itself on the spot. Real-time supply, demand match and tracking of youth is going to be our big goal. Will it happen today? Answer is no. Will it happen after 5 years? The answer is most likely yes.
Muchas gracias por su.
Well, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I have a question for you. What about the relationship between the central state, the central administration, and the regions in the area of training?
I think, like I said, the state governments have formed what we call as the state skill development missions. The number of connections with the state government by physically being present in the states or inviting them to sponsored workshops is becoming a way of life. We call them for specific state-level inputs with regard to what they see as the activity on the ground in the states and what are the kind of skills that will be more relevant than something else. I think every state needs and understands the demands of the youth, and for them it's a political necessity to make sure that the youth and the unemployment is not going to be a problem. So I think the state governments are completely aligned on the journey of skilling and transition of the youth from the informal to the formal sector, and deployment of vocational education in the schools, like I talked about through the NSQF. Parliament has ratified the deployment of the National Skills Qualification Framework at the school level, and any training providers at the end of 5 years, after having started about a year and a half ago, the funding from any government agency, whether it's the state or the central, will only happen to those which have endorsed this standard at the ground level. So I think the states are in complete sync with this. Some states may be going slow compared to the others, but I think everyone understands the need for employability of the youth through skilling and creation of entrepreneurships.
Well, regarding the bunch number of questions, you can see that people were very interested on your conference. Thank you very much. Gracias. Entiendo que pasamos.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Now we're going to break for coffee.
Thank you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Indicarles que vamos a.
So thank you very much. We're now going to break for coffee. Coffee will be served In a different room, I would like to welcome, by the way, François Renoussi from the French Embassy, who's just arrived.